Hello and welcome to Gigantic. So this Gigantic is a way that Juliet and I tend to do an overview of lots of ideas that we've been working with, and we've done it at various festivals around the country, and we thought it'd be a really good way to do Transmission Prize this year, because for our Transmission Prize we're encouraging everyone to get involved and really look in some detail at some of the people on the long list and work with us to get to a short list and an eventual winner. So these are kind of the accompanying notes to the long list that kind of really help you decide which ideas you're really interested in, which ones you'd like to go a bit deeper, find out a bit more, look at the video in depth, get the book, and then be part of the process of deciding a winner. We've done the long list, otherwise it would have been 42 videos to watch, which we thought was, a bit much. But yeah, and this is really kind of like the easiest way ever to be involved with a prize, and to really think about ideas that you really love, ideas that you think are really beneficial, both for you and for wider society, and those ideas that really need to be talked about so that they're taken back into our lives. Is that right, Juliet?
Yeah, that's brilliant. And I think this year's shortlist is so exciting, and I think obviously for everyone the last 12 months has been a massive period of change, but it's been an incredibly rich time for ideas, some of which have really come into their own this year. So I'm really excited about our shortlist, and I'm also really excited about having all of you involved to really choose who you think is your winner this year.
Yeah, so it's going to work a bit like this. We're going to talk for a minute or two about each of the ideas of the 15 authors, academics, speakers, writers that are on our long list, and decide which ones are for you. Hopefully you'll look at all of them, but this is just to give you a kind of idea of an introduction to them and their ideas. So let me start with Roman Krishnarik. You pronounce every letter, we've learned that, because we've worked with him many times. We worked with him on his book Empathy, and we worked with him on his book Carpe Diem Regained, The Vanishing Art of Seizing the Day. He's an author and a philosopher and kind of an activist as well, and we're big fans. So his book, or his piece of work really, because it extends far beyond the book, is How to Be a Good Ancestor, and this idea of the good ancestor. And this is quite a high concept idea that is at the heart of it, which is that there are many, many more people still to be born than are alive now when it comes to the history of the planet. And once you've made that shift, once you've accepted that idea, it's quite easy to understand that those future humans are going to need resources, they're going to need things from the planet, and perhaps they're not getting such a good deal with the way that we're going to be handing over the planet. And it really came into sharp relief this year for me in lockdown London, thinking what would I have done without those parks that the Victorians put in place. So it's a real way of thinking about the people who are going to come after you. And what Roman has done is he's brought together in one place a really, really compelling narrative of many ways, reasons and initiatives to become a good ancestor. And this works as a kind of bridge from wherever you are in terms of how you're living your life to how you could live your life as a really good ancestor. And it works on all kinds of levels, because I think what he really gets to the heart of is that sometimes it's really easy to be overwhelmed with this idea of saving the planet because it's just too big. But he's created an amazing resource to find ways that you can do this, and it's there for the lazy like me. You can leave a legacy if that's what you want to do, or you can get really, really involved. There's so many ideas, from citizen assemblies to 7 Generations initiatives, and really ideas to bring in your personal life, your hobbies, your career, your spare time. He's done all of the work, and plus he got Brian Eno to launch it with him, so that was quite smart thinking, wasn't it?
It really was. And also economist and previous Transmission Prize winner Kate Raworth. So it was a really lovely sort of panel, but very sort of familial discussion there that really brought his idea to life beautifully in that particular salon.
And you can just see it. So if that's something you'd like to find out more about, the next stage would be go and find that video, which is on your Zerucci player, and watch it. It's fantastic.
Well worth a watch. So our next big idea, Professor Stephen Reich's work has always been fascinating and relevant, but it really feels that it completely came into its own over the past 12 months. And Stephen is a professor of social psychology at the University of St Andrews, and he's also a member of the Independent Sage Committee. Now his work really focuses on group behaviour and individual social behaviour, and how being in part of a group or being outside a group impacts on us, and how we work together as a community. And there are lots and lots of different aspects to that. But during a global pandemic, this becomes something we really need to understand and really need to know about. And I think three sort of buzzwords, which we probably were not using very much in 2019, but we used a lot in 2020, are words like compliance, trust, and division. And what's really been fantastic about Stephen Reich's work has been that he's really given us the truth behind the headlines. He really understands how group dynamics work and really what is going on. And I think when it's very easy to read a very small snippet of something and inform your opinion on that, what he shows us in equally a very annotated way, because he's clear about the science behind it, is what's actually going on there. So I'll give you three examples of that. So the first one was around COVIDiots. You know, all these people going to the beach, having raves, hanging out when they shouldn't be. But actually what Stephen's work found was in compliance and us really supporting everyone else's safety was incredibly high. So that story behind the headlines, his work is like, no, that's not what's going on. It's been surprisingly well complied with, and actually people are really not only considering their own safety but the safety of others. And actually that's a really heartwarming story behind the headline. It actually shows we have a lot more faith and empathy for each other than may be apparent when you read something like a COVIDiot. The other thing is, another headline that he did about was the people hoarding toilet rolls, you know, taking everything from the supermarket shelves, how greedy humans really are. But actually this had much more to do with the way that our supply chain works, and actually even an increase in purchasing in only 6% resulted in the supermarket shelves emptying very quickly. So again, the truth was actually everyone got a little bit more in, and that had an impact on the whole, but it wasn't a deliberate ploy to hoard and get things from yourself. It was really what everyone did when they were approaching lockdown, and actually had a lot more to do with our social economics and our supply chain than it did with human behaviour. The third one is, a lot of Stephen's work looks at in-group and out-group, and how you're much more likely to behave in a certain way if your peer group or a group you feel you belong to is behaving in the same way. And this really calls into question things like leadership. Like, is leadership an important factor in compliance? And is trust in leadership an important factor in compliance? And I think we all know the answer to that one.
Oh no, he's been brilliant the way he's taken that idea of, you know, we are compliant and pushed it into the media.
Yeah.
It's so helpful.
Well, it makes you distrustful of your fellow humans, and actually if you realise that actually other people are really working to have your back, that's actually a much more positive story that actually creates more group cohesion. I think that's really something we need at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he's been brilliant. So our next speaker is Dr. Pia Callison. So she is a therapist, and she specialises in metacognitive therapy, which originated in our own Manchester, although she lives and practices MCT, as it's known, in Denmark. So her book was Live More, Think Less, Overcoming Depression and Sadness with Metacognitive Therapy. It's been very successful, and she designed the book to be full of strategies for regaining control over our thoughts as a way not just to overcome depression, but perhaps to avoid it altogether. So her research challenges the idea that the best way to treat crises in our life is to think long and hard until we come up with a solution. Instead, she explains so much more in her session, if you want to watch it, is that that spending too much time thinking about our problems and how to solve them can actually lead to depression. Because her idea is that the brain has almost 3 levels of operation, if you like, but the highest level is this metacognition, and we often need this metacognition to solve our problems that we're facing, but too much rumination, too much thinking about problems gets in its way of working. So MCT allows rumination to recede and gives our metacognition the best chance of helping us, gives our brain a chance to help us. So MCT could be as big as CBT one day. It's a different approach though, and we're quite wedded to CBT in the UK, and the NHS has invested in it heavily. So it doesn't really matter what success MCT has, it's going to be hard for us to hear about it, which is why one of the reasons I think I really love the work we do to look at lots of options for good mental health, because I think it's helpful to remember when you're considering your mental health, there are lots of ways and methods in which to get help.
Yeah, it's interesting, and we always think that we should go after the optimal result, but actually, again, the structures within which we work, so because the health service is so stretched and so regimented in a way, they adopted CBT for very good reasons, like had a 50% success rate, which was very high, but actually NCT has a 70% success rate, but it doesn't look like it's going to be replaced with that because so much investment has already gone into there.
Absolutely, Juliet.
And another real joy about doing salons is really exploring an idea that you may not have come across before and that might feel like quite a niche idea. And then as you dive deeper into it, you realise it actually reverberates through every aspect of your life. And I think the next big idea really does that. So Professor Russell Foster is a circadian neuroscientist at the University of Oxford. And all of his work looks at circadian rhythms, which are really a kind of a timekeeping that we have within each day, and it pretty much maps, not exactly the 24-hour clock that we have slight deviations from that. And his work is really fascinating for lots of reasons. Like basically everything that has life has a circadian rhythm, so mammals really have them, and creatures are really designed to live around their own circadian rhythm. So for example, a nocturnal animal like an owl will have a very different circadian rhythm to something that is much more active during the day. And these circadian rhythms really do kind of inform our evolution. So for humans, we need to be a lot more active during the day and to really replenish at night. So this biphasal way of being, which is the 2 phases, means that we're really replenishing our biological processes at night. And sleep has become a really huge issue during lockdown, during this period. We've all a lot of us have had much more vivid dreams. Maybe our sleeping patterns have been very disrupted. They might have changed altogether. And really big parts of Russell's work has really looked at the importance of sleep. And he said, really, we've become sleep invaders. Like we invade the night with we kind of extend our day, really by having devices, by having electric light. We've kind of imposed our will upon these natural rhythms that we have. But actually, he says, we do this at our peril, because these circadian rhythms really serve a brilliant biological process for us. And he gives an example of a lot of toxins that we might build up during the day. There's no point in our body regulating those at the time that we're building them up. So actually at night, we're really replenishing a lot of our biological systems. And I think that's actually something that he really brought to bed, like the importance of daylight to us. Like we need to be out in that morning light, even sitting close by a window, like your indoor light will not do that. You have to sit by a window, even better, be outside. Just sitting with the lamp on is not going to give you the light that you need. And even things like not going outside in the morning has a huge impact on your sleep rhythms. So there's so much in his work that is rich, and I personally got so much from it. And it really is, I think as sleep is becoming such a big subject for our times, his work really informs where our evolutionary sort of benefit for having that comes from.
Oh God, yeah, no, it's absolutely brilliant. It's definitely worth checking out. I didn't really realise circadian rhythms were a thing until working with him.
It feels like it belongs in the Fortune Times, but actually once you get to grips with it, I found it one of those ideas that really I got a lot of benefit from, because I've always quite disrupted sleep patterns, and actually understanding how to try and do that better and why was really helpful to me. And that we all have, there are different sort of chronological types in humans. We have like 3 types at least.
Oh, is that the lark, owl, and
the sort of in between?
Yeah.
Whereas most animals, they, like mice, for example, they all have the same biology, same circadian rhythm. Humans don't. They diversify and have 3.
Oh, I suppose because we need to be on the watch out for animals.
That's what he said. He said it's not proven, but that's what he thinks. That as a community, we had different rhythms because it served that protective purpose.
Wow. Okay, so we work perfectly well together as an owl and a lark. So our next speaker is Danny Gordon. So Danny is really interesting, I think. She is a certified medical doctor and integrative medical physician, meaning that her interest, which is cannabis as a botanical medicine, is worthy of consideration alongside and complementing Western medicine. So she kind of leads the world in expertise in CBD, as it's known, cannabis medicine. And she studied mind-body medicine at Harvard, and she co-founded the UK Medical Cannabis Clinician Society, and she set up the UK's first cannabis medicines clinic. So her story is really interesting, and if this is an area that interests you, it's really worth taking a look at her talk. And her book is The CBD Bible, Cannabis and the Wellness Revolution That Will Change Your Life, which is quite self-explanatory. But I think for Juliet and I, this was something that we are really interested in, because we knew from our work with Professor David Nutt, who's a neuropsychopharmacologist and a previous winner of the Transmission Prize, that it was going to be difficult in the UK to get any medical benefits from cannabis because of its illegality. And David is one of the foremost experts in and visionary of drug policy and neuropsychiatry. And he had said that he had told us that cannabis was one of the world's oldest medicine, but because it had been banned internationally for 50 years for political reasons, it was going to be really, really hard to find out how useful it could be. But he believes it could be the biggest innovation in new treatments in the next quarter of a century. But in order for us to have benefit from this, the benefits of cannabis, we really need a change in mindset from the medical profession, particularly in the UK. And this is what Danny is really, really involved in, because cannabis CBD could really help us with sleep, with chronic pain, with anxiety, with brain aging, with stress, with insomnia, burnout, fatigue, low health, depression, gut health, libido, autoimmune conditions, even epilepsy. And so there are so many potential benefits of it. And it's chronic pain that really got me, is that the numbers are absolutely phenomenal of people who are on really, really strong painkillers or are suffering chronic pain, and something like 28 million people in the UK at some point. And we can't really find out if there's anything in this drug that can help these people, because the medical profession is just not convinced by it, not able to look at it because of the difficulty with legality. So I think if that's something that you want to get involved with, Danny's book is a really good way of understanding a little bit more about it, to perhaps start having a bigger conversation about the uses within UK medicine.
Yeah, and I think I remember from David Nutt's work that cannabis and hemp weren't banned for pharmaceutical reasons, they're actually banned for industrial reasons, that hemp was such a great fabric that it actually threatened the cotton lobby that was very, very strong. So actually going back to the origins of why we think about certain things the way we do can be quite interesting to unpick them. And I think our next big idea really is again working on our health and kind of quite a radical reimagining of what we think by traditional medicine. And I think there are very few people in the world that could have written this book, but Dr. Jeff Rediger is an instructor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. But before that, he grew up in an Amish community. He studied divinity before becoming a doctor and then a psychiatrist. And what's really interesting is that his book really looks at the mind-body-spirit connection. Now, when I talk about that really sounds like a yoga session, or, just Juliet being all like left field again, esoteric. But actually what he's done is gone deep into the science of it. And actually it's a really lovely story behind it. He's obviously working in a medical environment, working in hospitals, and he was working with an oncology nurse, and she developed cancer. And she went to a healing centre, was noticing a lot of sort of spontaneous healing, remission, a very different approach to the medical establishment was happening. And she said, would you be interested in researching this? And he was very much like, no, not really. But he said she's very stubborn. And actually she started getting other people to write him letters and to be in touch with him about this phenomenon of kind of remission when people had diseases that were going to kill them. So this kind of over time piqued his interest. Now, what he really looked at is some key things to do that we really have quite a lot of control over. And he said people really radically change things like their diet, also even their reason to live. When some people found they were only given a year to live, they actually, rather than sort of feeling very negative about it, many people responded feeling like they could actually be free of other people's expectations. They could use this time in how they wanted. And he's really sort of translated this work into what can we do now to invest in a richer life now, as well as to really look at spontaneous healing and to sort of really quite serious diseases. What are the circumstances that can help remission in these? And he says one of the problems with the medical system is you become a specialist in one area. So if you're a cardiologist, you look at heart, and if you're a brain surgeon, obviously you're looking at brain, and all those parts are looked at very separately medically, but actually when you look at the bigger picture, that's actually what's really important to our health. And I think that's actually something he said, the research is really coming thick and fast now, and it's something I think is really going to transform the way we think about medical practice. And he says it's going to definitely transform the medical profession, the way it's currently structured, and I think that's a really exciting development. So his book is Cured: The Remarkable Science and Stories of Spontaneous Radical Healing, and it's really medical based, it's really well researched, and it really gives an optimistic and kind of pragmatic approach to best health.
Yeah, and so it would have been such an easy book to discount.
Yeah.
Exactly as you say, I think, and again, and one of the joys of what we do is the range of things that we look at.
Yeah.
And, the publisher was so keen that we looked at that book, and I'm so glad we did. It's phenomenal.
Yeah, and you realise the actual expertise and the years and years of research that goes into all these people's work, and it's like, these are the people who know, they're the people who've spent time never knowing that their subject was even going to come to anything, but actually then their work, actually they think this can make a difference to humanity and how we live and how we do things in the future, and I think that's very empowering.
Wow, you give me a brilliant segue to Nimco Ali, OBE. So Nimco is an author and a social activist, and she's the co-founder and CEO of the 5 Foundation, which is a global foundation, a global partnership to end female genital mutilation. And it's Nimco and her book, which has made the shortlist. Her book is what we're told not to talk about, but we're going to anyway, Women's Voices from East London to Ethiopia. So we worked with Nimco on a salon about rude women, which was originally the title for the book, I think, with Nikki Hodgson, in which Nimco makes the call that it's time that women start talking about our bodies and the things that they do that we sometimes feel shame about, and so we don't talk about them. And perhaps you should listen to the salon if that is an area of interest, because she's very keen that we should invite conversation about the functions of our body into general conversation, which Juliet and I have been trying to do on our running meetings.
Comes up a lot.
It really does. But it's difficult to talk about. It's even difficult to talk about this now on camera, But if you think about the way we talk about mental health in public now, whereas how it used to be spoken about in 3 decades ago, we really can do that. And it's a commonality of talking about the shared experience in our bodies that Nimco really wants us to talk about, with the ultimate aim, as she puts it, changing the trajectory of human experience, because there are 70 million women at risk of FGM in the next 20 years. And Nimco, who experienced FGM herself, is determined to prevent this happening to them. And she will too, as Nikki Hodgson said, who interviewed her. So Nimco absolutely had to be on the shortlist. What an ambition.
Yeah. And I think it's I've got so much time and respect for people that want to change the world, and because I think everyone wants to sort of make a positive difference, I think, in their life, and they want to do that. For the people who really take on something massive, it takes such a commitment and such a life force to be able to make that change. It's so inspiring. It makes you realise that you can do things even in a small way, if someone can do something like that and affect change in such a radical way.
And it's been a really difficult year for coming together with other groups.
Yeah.
And I love the way she's saying there is a commonality.
Yeah.
It's women from East End to Ethiopia.
Yeah.
We can stand together even though we're really different, because this has to end. Of
Yeah.
course it does.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm feeling a lot about the collective as we're going through this, and it's really making me feel very empowered and positive about our future, which I'm really enjoying. I hope you're feeling that too.
Well, every year has its own themes, right?
It does.
So it's not us, it's what
presents and what comes
exactly.
through, which is beautiful. So at the end of 2019, I finished studying for a master's, and it nearly killed me, but I did it. And I had 3 books that I really wanted to read when I finished, and the next book was on my list, and I wasn't disappointed. So in my 3 books I wanted to read, this was one of them. So Hallie Rubenhold's book, The 5, really researches the untold lives of the women who were killed by Jack the Ripper. And I think it's such a brilliant book, and it's so important for so many reasons, and it's really engaging, it's really human, but also I think there's been a real... We never look at the women in that story, ever. We kind of mythologise, really, the murderer, and it's quite sensational. There's a lot of grotesque imagery around that. And the women are treated as prostitutes, so therefore treated as having a lower life value, which of course isn't the case. But what Hallie does is she unearths so much research about these women's lives, and she brings them back into full focus as much as she can. And it's really a phenomenal piece of work. And I think... not only do you really get to know each individual woman of the 5 women, but you get to really understand the time. And there's some beautiful bits, like when I'm walking through St James's Park, which I do quite a lot, there's a whole bit about the barracks and what London was like in the 1900s. And it's like a living history, her book. Like because obviously I live in London at the moment, when I'm walking around those streets, I can feel her characters around me, and just... It's such a brilliant insight into women's lives that we never really see. So it does a lot of important things. First of all, it gives voice to the voiceless. It turns these stories, and I think this is something we're increasingly looking at, stories are not just the main person who tells them. Around every narrative, there's loads of narratives grouped around that. And I think we're really starting to learn the value of listening to multiple voices concurrently to get a fuller picture. And this book does that amazingly. It really helps us to understand the social conditions, the way people lived, the fact that there were 70,000 people wandering around London at night looking for somewhere to sleep just makes you really realise how vulnerable people were, just having to live on the street, to sleep on the street. And as we found out from Russell Foster's work, we need to sleep. And I think what she does is she brings back empathy, humanity and reality to these women in such a powerful, brilliant way that brings that period of time to life. And yeah, for me, it was just a fantastic book, and I'm so glad it was on my 3.
Oh, I know, absolutely. I know, it's just an absolutely brilliant book. Yeah, and history's come up a lot this year.
Unusually for us.
Yeah. Do you remember that geography solved everything?
Yeah.
This year.
Again, unusually for us.
This year is history that seems to be such a huge theme. And I'm going to talk briefly about Margaret Macmillan, whose book War, How Conflict Defines Us is really worth a listen. So Margaret is a professor of history at the University of Toronto. She's also a professor of international history at Oxford, and she specialises in British imperial history and the international history of the 19th and 20th century. And she has written the book War, How Conflict Defines Us. And when you're thinking, I'm not sure this is for me, please can I persuade you to have a listen to Margaret. Firstly, she's an astonishing historian, and as we've just said, history has so many answers and so many questions this year. And also the story of how a book came about is really worth thinking about. So she was told by an educational consultant that the course she wanted to teach, that the students would prefer the history of peace to the history of war. And I think her response to that is, yes, we do. But unfortunately, as humans, war has been much more common than peace. And I think it's really right that she reminds us. Because, it can be that we're very uncomfortable in the West talking about the likelihood of war, but it is always a likelihood. And we're in a really odd position of a long peace here in the West. And I think she really wants us to look at the truth of that long peace and in accepting what goes into it, like a united Europe, how we might be able to keep it. But Margaret's whole idea is that we have to include war in our study of history if we are to make any sense of the past. And we are at a point in our own history where we are trying to make sense of the past. So I think it's essential that we listen to really brilliant historians. Well, we give an ear to Margaret.
Yeah, I loved that particular salon actually. And again, I think it's easy to think, I don't really want to hear about war, particularly when we're under a kind of quite a critical time. It feels like you want more lightness, but actually understanding that helps you to understand how peace works. And I think that's always understanding where something's come from. Then you can kind of try and avoid it in the future and make better decisions in future. And that's been another big theme of this year's Transmission Prize. And a big aspect of our Transmission Prize is really about, of course, amazing ideas, but also brilliantly communicated ideas. And our next big idea is by Natalie Haynes, who is a brilliant communicator. And you've probably seen her, we've worked with Natalie a lot over the years, and we've been very lucky. She's a former stand-up comedian and a real passionate advocate of access to the classics and what they can teach us. And she does that not only in kind of arenas like ours, but also goes out to schools, really engaging young people in classics work, and understanding that knowledge is for everyone. It's not just for people who go to public schools or study at some of the big universities. It's for everyone. And these stories are actually part of our collective cultures. So her latest book is Pandora's Jar, and even the title is fantastic, because when we think about Pandora, most people think of a box. So Pandora is this like pesky person who's opened a box and out comes all the troubles of the world. And actually the truth, as usual, is much more nuanced than that. And actually a jar was a much more vulnerable sort of structure that could be knocked over. It was made from clay, it could crack and break. It wasn't a sort of a volition of opening and unleashing it. Something could be easily broken. And actually another beautiful part of the story which rarely gets told is what's left when all these troubles are unleashed is hope. And it's really, we're not sure if that hope is still in the jar, ready to do its stuff, or if it's just sort of waiting to be used. But I think that's a really beautiful sort of rereading. Even the title of the book is a beautiful rereading. And what Natalie's work does is it helps us to re-engage with classical Roman and Greek myths in a way that is understandable and relevant to our times. And that's a really good gift, because these stories perpetuate. We think we know these stories anyway, and they're within the culture, or within our culture, within European culture. And yet they've been misrepresented in so many ways. And what I feel like she does by examining the original texts, where these texts have been amended over time, the original translation, who made these amendments, and what was the impact on that amendment on the story that we then receive, is so fascinating. And what Natalie's brilliant at is she understands the text, she goes back, reads the translation, she delivers with wit, she represents these women and these female characters in a way that is so relevant for our times. And I think there's a real danger with these sort of ancient stories as being as set in stone as someone who's gazed at Medusa, but actually they're still living and vital. And if we can sort of look at their roots rather than where they've become, we can actually find female characters with whom we can engage, see ourselves reflected in, and realise ourselves through them. And actually that's a massive gift, to be able to revisit stories in a way that feels that we can see ourselves in them.
Hey, amazing, Juliet. And what a book Pandora's Jar is as well.
I loved it.
Absolutely. So you were talking about Hallie's book. I remember it was one of the first books I read when we were doing Also, which is our festival, which hopefully will go ahead this year and you might want to come to. And just being on the grass in the sun reading it, it's just such a happy memory from 2020, of which there are few. Brilliant book. Okay, so the next book is Mark Gevisser, who is South African writer and journalist. And we do love a long researched book, don't we? The longer the better sometimes.
Yes.
So 7 years it took him to research this book, which is called The Pink Line: Journeys Across the World's Queer Frontiers. So his question is, how did LGBT plus rights become a dividing line across the world? And what Nikki Hodgson, who did this interview, which really suggests going to have a look at, it's a brilliant interview that she did, is that as she explained it, is that there is a culture war going on, as we all know, around being fought around trans rights, for example. But the difficulty is, as this culture war is raging, the trans youths are being caught up in the middle, and they're paying the price, often with their sanity and their livelihoods. What Mark's research shows is that now more than ever, LGBT plus people are being made political pawns the world over. And while they're in the crossfire, it's really detracting us from doing what we should do, which is caring for them. And Mark really makes a point that, while there is so much time and attention is going into the culture wars around the issues, that these big shadowy forces that are really amplifying disagreements between people who really do care, which leads to even more divide. There's a fantastic piece of work, Pink Line.
Yeah, and I think that's been something as well we've had to address in the past year, is actually really huge issues like trans rights, like George Floyd's murder, like Black Lives Matter, like the fact that people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds are more likely to be affected by COVID. And that I think we can't shy away from these bigger issues, and they can sometimes be hard to look at, but actually it's really important that we do, because it's only by really sitting with them and understanding how we really think about these things that we're able to make better choices and more informed choices. And for me, the next big idea is something that really stayed with me last year, or has stayed with me since last year. And it's Dr. Pragya Agarwal's book, Sway, Unravelling Unconscious Bias. Now, what's really interesting about unconscious bias is that it is unconscious, but actually once you become more conscious of it, it empowers you to be able to make more informed decisions. And actually what Pragya's managed to do is to tackle a massive subject that affects us all. Some people, it has more negative impact on than others, obviously. But what she's managed to do is to write a piece that makes us understand the terminology and the jargon a lot better. She makes it really clear. It's really non-judgmental, and yet it doesn't shy away from the big issues. And I think to balance all those things is really quite a feat. And I think it's kind of really encouraged me on a personal level to engage more and to dive deeper into my own thinking on lots of different things, and how can I reconsider this, how can I take on multiple perspectives. And yeah, I think there's a lot of power in that, into kind of embracing a wider outlook. And obviously she takes on some of the massive subjects, women's rights, racism, but also she looks at lots of aspects of unconscious bias, like class, accent, height, body size. The unconscious bias is writ large, you know. And I think when you really understand what your biases might be, you're really in a position to be able to do something about it. And she also makes things like understanding intersectionality, which is basically, for example, if you're a gay black woman, you've got at least sort of 3 parts of intersectionality. So it's where different kind of biases might segue to create multiple barriers to inclusion. And that sounds wordy, but she makes it so understandable and so relevant, so that we can be better as a society, including people and giving people what actually is an equal opportunity to fulfill their potential. And who really doesn't want that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Excellent, Juliet. So we're getting towards the last few people on the long list now, and it's my great pleasure to talk about Adam. So Adam Rutherford is a geneticist, author and broadcaster, and it's taken me a while to get to grips with his book How to Argue with a Racist, even though I've interviewed Adam a couple of times. And that's why this prize is so great, because you can't get ideas just by listening to them for 5 minutes, or absolutely, listening to them on one podcast and think, well, I get that now. I think my understanding of Adam's work has come over sort of 6 or 7 years of reading the book, talking to him, reading it again, and I could really begin to see this book, How to Argue with a Racist, layered through his other books. And it's such a pleasure because they all, you see where he's going with his career and his and getting ideas out there, and it's just so interesting, because genetics is not something it's easy to get to grips with, but it's really important. This is Adam's idea with this book, How to Argue with a Racist, and I hope I get it right for you. So I'm going to paraphrase. So his big idea is that early humans travelled a lot, mainly away from people trying to kill them and towards people they wanted to have sex with. But when the people trying to kill them dropped down to manageable level, then they stayed there, often for many years, at which point, in which part of the story they then start telling themselves that the land that they live in is kind of their land, and it's for people like them. And then when they look around and see people like them, and they see, oh, well, look, we're all the same. We all like this thing and that thing, and we like eating this thing, and we do this, and we have more or less the same skin. So this must be where we all belong together. And because they believe this a lot, they start to demand that science must support it. Because as we know from prizes before, it's really important the stories we tell ourselves. They're really, really powerful. So then there becomes this leap that it must be in our DNA, that, we must be bound together in these groups like race because it's in our DNA. And this is where Adam says, no, you cannot have his science. This is not true. You cannot have his genetics, a subject he loves. He's dedicated his life towards it, and he will not have it to support unsupportable ideas. Racial purity is pure fantasy, he says. For humans, there are no pure bloods.
Yeah.
And
good.
Yeah.
And he knows. And let's look at the genetics. And it doesn't mean that structural racism and things that doesn't have a massive impact, but we know that it's not based in genetics and it's not based in biology, then again it's something we can do more about.
Absolutely. He will not allow people, people going around using his science to make points that aren't true. And it's he's really fought this a lot this year personally, and it's a battle. I thought this with Praga as well. I know that some subjects are harder to take out than others.
Yeah, but it's important that you do. And actually I think it's really interesting that his science, but actually really it's all of our science.
Of course.
And that's the point. And I think that's what I love about doing Salon, and also is the fact that these people are committed for it to be all of our information, and that's what's brilliant about it. They're not doing this research because they want to kind of keep hold of it and get accolades. They're doing it because they think it's of value to human society, and so it's an incredibly generous gift that most of these people are creating, which is the joy of it.
Absolutely, we love generosity, and that book is quite short actually, and so it's How to Argue the Race is a good one to buy, and it gives you, as Juliet says, it becomes your information to use next time you need it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we love big ideas, and we also love usable ideas that you can use to make the changes that you want to make if you want to make them. And Lauren Bravo's idea is a really life-changing one, and it seems simple. And it is simple, but actually the reverberations of it are just wonderful. And we've both really engaged with this idea, and Helen will talk you through her outfit later. So Lauren Bravo is a writer and an author who writes about food, about fashion, about feminism, and about pop culture. And her latest book is How to Break Up with Fast Fashion. And it really offers us a chance and some very real and achievable ways to change the way in which we shop. Now, clothes are a vital part of, we have to wear them, we can't walk around naked, but they're a vital part of how we express ourselves as human. They're functional, they're how we respond to our environment. Dressing up can be fun. We can identify certain social groups, people, music types, all kinds of things through clothes. And clothes can be an expressive force, but actually the fashion and textile industry is the 7th biggest polluter globally, and climate change is such a massive, or climate crisis, let's call it what it is such a massive issue now and going forward. And actually, why not embrace something that's part of our everyday as a vehicle for change? And there's a very, very achievable, impactful vehicle for change. And what again I love about this book is Lauren doesn't diminish how fun and how exciting clothes and fashion can be. She doesn't take out any of the joy of that and any of the reasons you might want to buy clothes or wear things or look good at any of that. She celebrates that. But what she does do is look at how you can maybe do that differently, how you can make different choices in how and where you buy, how you repair your clothes, and how you can even rent clothes. And she gives so much practical advice on how to do this. And I really love this book for celebrating our love of clothes and our love of fashion while still making us be responsible for our choices. And I think she does that in a brilliantly, again, non-judgmental, incredibly practical. And she's really turned me onto lots of new designers, people that are sort of producing things ethically, whether I actually do need something or not, or whether I actually have something in the bottom drawer that I haven't worn for ages and will do that job. And it's just brilliant. It's a brilliant book, and it's so relevant for now.
I think that's right. And I've worked with Lauren 4 times this year on her many ideas, a lot of which are in the book How to Break Up with Fast Fashion. And you know, it's really helped me understand how you do take an idea into your life. You know, it takes a long time, and you have to keep thinking about it and keep kind of refining how it's working for you, where it's not working for you, where you stop to do it, where you've fallen off the wagon or whatever. But I'm glad to say all of my clothes now are now Lauren approved. This is my rental dress.
This is my vintage dress.
Your vintage dress. My bra's made out of dead stock fabric. It's made by women in the East End. And my pants are made by a woman in Brighton. Lots of different options you have for all kind of prices, etc., etc. But I think I'm there. I think I've really taken Lauren's idea.
You have. I've really noticed that, and I really love it actually, because it's quite exciting and to see how you still look fabulous, but you have a sort of a garment for a few weeks rather than a few years, and you give it back, and other people can enjoy them just as much.
Absolutely.
And it's good, you get bored of things in your wardrobe, so why not update it all the time in a really ethical way?
Absolutely. And there are issues. There are loads of issues around clothes, but we have to start. We have to start. Yeah. And I love Lauren, and I think she's a brilliant communicator. She never makes you feel excluded. You know, it's for everyone. So even if you're a fleece wearer, it's for you. So to wrap up, our final speaker is a final person on the long list is Caroline Steele, and her book is Citopia. She's an expert, she's an architect actually, and an expert on how cities feed themselves. And there's just two points I want to make about her book. It's really brilliant. I really recommend going and having a look at that, talk in more detail. But the one really chilling thought was that the reason that the Roman Empire collapsed was it ran out of food. The countryside, it used the countryside so much, it exhausted the soil, it chopped down all the trees, it ran out of food basically, and it feels so sort of similar to where we are now. And it destroyed an entire empire. So I think there's a kind of like a real reason to kind of start looking about how we feed our cities, given more and more of us are going to be living in cities. And the second sort of joyous kind of news was something called the Preston model, which I wanted to bring in because my best friend the bear lives in Preston. So I'm always going on about how great Yorkshire is. I wanted to shine a light on Preston. And this is, in 2011, there was a £700 million sort of regeneration of the city centre with John Lewis, Marks and Spencer's, and it fell apart. And they lost the money, and they were really, really struggling to make sense of how they could could, make Preston have a dynamic and useful city centre. So one of the councillors there decided that he would play a long game. He would be a good ancestor, and he managed to persuade so many people in the council to try and use local companies for everything, for school yogurts, for prisons, for anywhere that there was somewhere that was owned by the government. He went in and persuaded them in any way possible, breaking down to tiny little businesses where they could use individual farms, and this has been phenomenally successful, and Preston is now one of the best cities in the country for feeding itself. It's called guerrilla localism, and it's such a brilliant model. So I think there are two really interesting ways at looking at the way that we feed our cities, because we've only got a couple of minutes to talk about it, but I really recommend Citopia by Caroline Steele.
Thank you. Well, that's been our kind of headlines of our shortlist, and I hope you found that useful. I actually really loved talking and sort of revisiting those ideas again when we've been going through this. So yeah,
Who do you think is going to win then?
I have no idea.
Who do you think?
Yeah, who do you think is going to win? To be honest, there are so many great ideas, and actually what I love about the shortlist is I'll be happy for anyone to win it.
It's a long list at the moment.
It's a long list.
Yeah, we will go to a short list.
There's an extra long list, wasn't there?
Yeah.
There's a really, really long list, and now we're down.
There is. So I suppose the next stage is we've given you an overview. I hope that's been useful. I really suggest going to see the ones that interest you. We will be sending out your voting sort of digital papers for you to pick your top, I think it'll be 6.
Okay.
I think it'll be 6.
Yeah.
To make the short list. Before we decide to go for a winner. So thank you so much for being with us, and I hope you've enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you for tuning in, and I really hope you enjoy the process as much as we have so far.